The story begins in the quiet countryside of 19th century England, a time when life moved slowly, and traditions shaped almost every part of a person's future. In those days, especially for young women, life often followed a very predictable path. They grew up helping their families, learning household responsibilities, and eventually preparing for marriage and a simple domestic life. It was within this world that a young woman named Mary Ann Ansell began her life. She was not born into wealth or influence. Her upbringing was modest, shaped by the ordinary struggles and routines of working-class life. Like many girls of her time, Mary Ann learned early that survival depended on patience, discipline, and the ability to adapt to whatever circumstances life presented. Very little about her early years suggested that her name would one day become part of a story remembered for generations. To the people around her, she was simply another young woman growing up in a quiet community where everyone knew each other's families and reputations mattered greatly. In such towns, people paid close attention to behavior, relationships, and character. A person's choices were rarely private because news traveled quickly through neighbors and friends. Growing up in this environment meant that Mary Ann learned to present herself carefully, always aware that society judged women harshly if they stepped outside expected norms. As she moved into adulthood, Mary Ann reached the stage in life where many young women began thinking about stability and marriage. Opportunities for independence were limited, so finding a reliable husband was often seen as the safest way to build a secure future. Around this time, fate brought someone new into her life, a man whose presence would eventually shape the course of her story. His name was Herbert Armstrong. Herbert appeared to be everything a young woman might hope for. He was confident, well-spoken, and carried himself with the kind of charm that easily gained people's trust. To those observing from the outside, he seemed like a respectable man, capable of offering a comfortable life. Their first meetings were ordinary, the kind of simple interactions that slowly grow into something more meaningful. Conversations became longer, and the familiarity between them began to deepen. In communities like theirs, relationships rarely developed in secrecy. Friends and neighbors noticed when two people began spending more time together, and before long, it became clear that Mary Ann and Herbert were growing close. For Mary Ann, the attention and companionship likely felt reassuring. At a time when stability was uncertain and the future depended heavily on marriage, Herbert seemed like someone who could provide direction and security. As weeks turned into months, their connection strengthened, and what began as simple companionship gradually transformed into affection. The relationship followed the traditional rhythm of courtship common in that era. There were shared walks, quiet conversations, and the slow building of trust between two people imagining a life together. For Mary Ann, this relationship probably represented hope, the possibility of building a home, starting a family, and creating a life that felt safe and meaningful was the dream many women held during that time. Herbert's presence made that dream seem closer to reality. Yet beneath the calm surface of this developing relationship, the future was already quietly shaping itself in ways no one could yet see. At that moment, Mary Ann was simply a young woman standing at the beginning of adulthood, believing she had found a partner who would share her journey. To the outside world, their connection looked like a normal and promising romance, one that would naturally lead toward marriage and the responsibilities of family life. Nothing about their story appeared unusual or troubling. If anyone had asked the people around them what they expected for the couple's future, they likely would have imagined a quiet life built on ordinary routines and familiar hopes. But life rarely unfolds exactly as people expect. The same relationship that once seemed to promise stability would eventually become part of a much darker narrative, one that historians and storytellers would revisit long after the events themselves had passed. At this early stage, however, none of that was visible. All that existed was a young woman named Mary Ann Ansell, a man named Herbert Armstrong, and the quiet beginning of a relationship that seemed destined to follow the ordinary path of love, marriage, and shared life. In that peaceful moment, before circumstances grew complicated and before difficult choices appeared, their story still felt simple, hopeful, and full of possibilities. As the relationship between Mary Ann Ansell and Herbert Armstrong continued to grow, it slowly moved beyond simple companionship and into something deeper. In the small and closely connected communities of 19th century England, relationships rarely remained private for long. Neighbors noticed the way the two spent time together, the familiarity in their conversations, and the quiet comfort that seemed to exist between them. What had started as ordinary meetings gradually became a recognized courtship. People around them began to assume what would likely happen next, because in that era, there was usually only one direction such a relationship could go. Marriage was the natural destination, and before long, that expectation became a reality. When Mary Ann and Herbert finally decided to marry, it likely felt like the beginning of a stable and hopeful future. For Mary Ann, this step represented security in a world where women had limited independence and very few opportunities to shape their own destinies. Marriage was more than a romantic commitment. It was a practical necessity that defined a woman's social position and long-term stability. Standing at the start of this new chapter, Mary Ann probably imagined a life that followed the familiar pattern she had seen around her since childhood. A modest home, shared responsibilities, and the gradual building of a family were the dreams many women held. And it is easy to imagine that she believed her life was moving toward that same peaceful direction. In the early days of their marriage, everything appeared normal from the outside. The routines of daily life began to settle in. Herbert worked to support the household while Mary Ann focused on maintaining their home and managing the responsibilities that came with married life. These roles were typical for couples of that period, and there was nothing unusual about the structure of their lives. To neighbors and acquaintances, they looked like another ordinary married couple trying to build a future together in a modest community where stability was valued above almost everything else. However, as time passed, the reality of marriage began to reveal itself in more complicated ways. The early excitement that often follows a wedding slowly gave way to the practical pressures of everyday life. Financial worries, social expectations, and the constant effort required to maintain a household could gradually change the atmosphere between two people. In many marriages of that era, difficulties were rarely discussed openly, especially for women who were expected to remain patient and loyal regardless of circumstances. If problems developed, they often stayed hidden behind the closed doors of the home. For Mary Ann, the life she had imagined may not have unfolded exactly as she hoped. Herbert's personality, which once appeared confident and charming, may have revealed more complex traits as time went on. Some accounts describe him as a man who could be unpredictable in his behavior, someone whose moods and decisions did not always create a peaceful environment. Living with such uncertainty could slowly wear down a person's sense of comfort and security. For a woman in Mary Ann's position, there were very few options for escape. Divorce was rare and socially damaging, and returning to one's family was often seen as a failure rather than a solution. Within this reality, Mary Ann's emotional world may have begun to change. The dreams that once seemed so close might have started to feel distant, replaced by the quiet weight of responsibilities and expectations. It is difficult to know exactly what she felt during this period, but it is clear that her life was becoming more complicated than the simple vision she once held. The contrast between hope and reality can be powerful, especially when a person feels trapped within circumstances they cannot easily change. Meanwhile, life around them continued as usual. The community carried on with its routines, unaware of any deeper tensions that might exist behind the doors of the Armstrong household. To outsiders, Mary Ann and Herbert still appeared to be living the same ordinary married life that so many couples shared during that era. Yet beneath that surface, emotions, frustrations, and quiet thoughts may have been slowly building over time. It is often during these quiet, unseen moments that the direction of a person's life begins to shift. The changes do not happen suddenly or dramatically. Instead, they develop gradually, shaped by repeated experiences, disappointments, and reflections that remain hidden from everyone else. For Mary Ann, the early years of marriage became a period where the difference between expectation and reality grew clearer with each passing day. What once seemed like the beginning of a stable and predictable future was slowly turning into something far more uncertain. And within that uncertainty, the seeds of decisions and emotions were beginning to form, decisions that would eventually influence the course of her life in ways no one around her could yet imagine. As the years of marriage continued, the emotional distance between Mary Ann Ansell and Herbert Armstrong seemed to grow slowly but steadily. From the outside, their life still looked ordinary, but inside their home, the atmosphere was becoming heavier with each passing year. What once began with hope and excitement had gradually turned into a routine filled with quiet tension and unspoken frustration. In many relationships, the earliest signs of unhappiness are small and almost invisible. They appear as short disagreements, long silences, or moments where two people begin to feel that they are no longer truly understood by each other. Over time, those small moments can quietly reshape an entire relationship. For Mary Ann, this period of her life may have been filled with mixed emotions. She had once believed that marriage would provide stability and companionship, yet the reality seemed far more complicated. Living with Herbert meant constantly adjusting to his moods and decisions, and as time went on, those adjustments may have begun to feel exhausting. In the society she lived in, a woman was expected to remain loyal to her husband and maintain the appearance of a respectable home, regardless of personal struggles. This expectation often forced women to keep their thoughts and frustrations hidden from the outside world. Complaints were rarely shared openly, and emotional isolation could slowly build inside a person without anyone noticing. It was during this emotionally complicated time that Mary Ann's life began to change in ways she may not have expected. Stories from that era suggest that she eventually formed a close connection with another man named Arthur Reginald Dyson. At first, the relationship may have seemed harmless, perhaps nothing more than friendly conversations or occasional moments of understanding between two people. But when someone feels lonely or misunderstood within their own home, even small gestures of kindness from another person can begin to carry a deeper meaning. For Mary Ann, the attention and warmth she experienced in these interactions may have awakened emotions that had long been buried beneath the weight of her difficult marriage. As their connection grew stronger, the situation became increasingly complicated. Relationships like this were extremely dangerous in the strict social environment of 19th century England. Reputation mattered deeply, and even the suggestion of an improper relationship could destroy a woman's standing in the community. Mary Ann likely understood these risks very clearly, yet emotions often move in directions that logic cannot easily control. What may have started as simple companionship gradually turned into something that created an emotional conflict she could no longer ignore. Inside her mind, two very different realities were beginning to clash. On one side was the life she already had, a marriage that tied her to Herbert and the responsibilities that came with being his wife. On the other side was the possibility of something new, a future that felt less restrictive and perhaps more hopeful. The tension between these two paths must have been overwhelming. In a time when divorce was almost impossible and social expectations were rigid, escaping an unhappy marriage was not simply a personal decision. It was a complicated and often unreachable dream. As the months passed, these emotional pressures may have started to change the way Mary Ann saw her situation. When a person feels trapped in circumstances that seem impossible to escape, their thoughts can begin to explore darker possibilities. At first, those thoughts may appear briefly, almost like distant ideas that are quickly pushed away. But when frustration and longing continue to grow, those same ideas can slowly return again and again, becoming more difficult to ignore each time they appear. For Mary Ann, the life she once accepted may have started to feel like a barrier standing between her and the future she now imagined. Herbert, who had once been the man she trusted to build a stable life with, had become part of the problem she could not solve. Meanwhile, the emotional connection she felt elsewhere may have made the contrast even sharper. The more she imagined a different life, the more her current reality seemed like something she needed to escape. During this period, nothing dramatic had happened yet. There were no shocking events or sudden confrontations that outsiders could see. Instead, everything was unfolding quietly inside Mary Ann's thoughts and emotions. From the outside, the Armstrong household continued to appear ordinary, just another married couple living through the routines of everyday life. But beneath that calm surface, the direction of Mary Ann's future was slowly shifting. The frustrations, hopes, and hidden feelings that had been building for years were beginning to shape her decisions in ways that would eventually lead her toward a moment where imagination and reality would collide, and where a single choice could change not only her life, but the lives of everyone connected to her forever. As the quiet tensions inside the household continued to grow, the life of Mary Ann Ansell slowly moved toward a moment that would change everything. From the outside, nothing seemed dramatically different. The small community around them still saw an ordinary couple living an ordinary life. Days passed with the same routines, the same conversations, and the same appearances of normality. But beneath that calm surface, Mary Ann's thoughts had been changing for a long time. The frustration, emotional distance, and the complicated feelings that had built up inside her were no longer just distant thoughts. They had begun to shape the way she looked at her future and the choices that might lead her toward a different life. At some point during this period, the quiet balance of their lives suddenly shifted. News began to spread that Herbert Armstrong had fallen seriously ill. Illness was not unusual in 19th century England, where medical knowledge was limited, and sudden sickness could affect even healthy people without warning. For neighbors and acquaintances, the situation initially appeared to be nothing more than a case of unfortunate health problems. Herbert's condition seemed to worsen quickly, and the household that had once been filled with routine suddenly became a place of concern and uncertainty. People around them likely expected that Mary Ann, as a devoted wife, would remain by Herbert's side while he struggled with his illness. In those times, caring for a sick spouse was considered a natural duty, and the community would have assumed that she was doing everything possible to help him recover. From the outside, it may have appeared that Mary Ann was fulfilling this role, maintaining the image of a concerned partner during a difficult moment. Yet the situation inside the home may have been far more complicated than anyone realized. As Herbert's condition continued to decline, the atmosphere around the house grew increasingly tense. Illness often brought worry not only about health, but also about finances and the uncertain future that followed. For a married woman in Mary Ann's position, the possibility of losing a husband meant facing a completely new and unpredictable life. At the same time, the emotional conflicts that had been building inside her for years had not simply disappeared. Those feelings were still present, quietly influencing how she viewed everything happening around her. Eventually, the moment arrived that changed the course of the story. Herbert Armstrong died, leaving behind a shocked household and a community trying to understand what had happened. At first, his death seemed like a tragic but natural result of illness. In an era when many diseases could not be properly diagnosed or treated, sudden deaths were sadly common. Neighbors likely offered their sympathy, believing that Mary Ann had just lost her husband after a painful period of sickness. However, as time passed, certain details began to raise quiet questions among the people who knew the family. Sometimes, it is not a single dramatic discovery that creates suspicion, but rather a collection of small observations that slowly form a pattern. A conversation here, an unusual reaction there, or simply a feeling that something about the situation did not fully make sense. In small communities where everyone paid attention to one another's lives, even the smallest inconsistencies could quickly become the subject of whispered discussions. Some individuals began to reflect on Herbert's sudden decline and the circumstances surrounding his illness. The speed of his worsening condition, combined with subtle rumors about the household, started to create an atmosphere of uncertainty. None of these questions immediately turned into accusations, but they planted seeds of doubt that would not easily disappear. People wondered whether Herbert's illness had truly been a natural tragedy or whether something else might have played a role in his death. Meanwhile, Mary Ann continued to live under the watchful eyes of a community that had begun to look at the situation differently. The sympathy that once surrounded her gradually mixed with curiosity and suspicion. In a society where reputation was everything, even a hint of controversy could change the way people viewed someone they had known for years. Conversations that once carried simple condolences slowly transformed into quiet speculation. As these doubts grew stronger, the story that had once appeared to be a simple tale of illness and loss began to shift into something much darker and more mysterious. The death of Herbert Armstrong was no longer seen only as a tragedy. It had become the center of a growing question that many people wanted answered. Whether those suspicions were justified or not, the peaceful image of the Armstrong household had already begun to crumble. What had once looked like an ordinary marriage ending in unfortunate circumstances was now becoming a story filled with uncertainty, hidden emotions, and the possibility that the truth behind Herbert's death might be far more complicated than anyone had first believed. As time passed after the death of Herbert Armstrong, the quiet questions that had begun circulating within the community slowly grew louder. What had initially appeared to be a tragic but natural death no longer felt so simple to the people who followed the story closely. In small 19th century towns, rumors could travel faster than facts, and once suspicion entered the public conversation, it was almost impossible to remove. Neighbors, acquaintances, and even distant observers began discussing the strange details surrounding Herbert's illness and sudden death. Some wondered whether the circumstances had truly been as ordinary as they first appeared. At the center of all this attention was Mary Ann Ansell, the woman who had once simply been known as Herbert's wife. Now, however, her name was becoming linked to a story that people were trying to understand piece by piece. The curiosity that surrounded her life slowly began to attract the attention of authorities, because when persistent doubts appear around an unexpected death, investigators are often forced to look more closely. What began as quiet speculation gradually developed into a more serious examination of the events that had taken place inside the Armstrong household. As investigators and officials started asking questions, they attempted to reconstruct the final days of Herbert's life. They looked at the timeline of his illness, the way his symptoms had developed, and the people who had been closest to him during that time. Situations like this often reveal details that were previously overlooked. Small pieces of information, which once seemed unimportant, can suddenly gain significance when viewed from a different perspective. Witnesses may remember conversations, behaviors, or unusual circumstances that did not stand out at the time but now appear more meaningful. During this process, attention slowly turned toward Mary Ann's personal life and the emotional circumstances surrounding her marriage. Authorities became interested not only in Herbert's death, but also in the relationships and tensions that had existed before it. The connection between Mary Ann and Arthur Reginald Dyson, which had once been private, now became part of the wider story being examined. For investigators, understanding the emotional and social context of a situation is often just as important as studying physical evidence, because motives and relationships can reveal why certain actions might have taken place. As the investigation continued, the case began attracting more public attention. Stories about the mysterious death and the complicated relationships surrounding it spread beyond the small community where the events had first occurred. Newspapers and public discussions often focused on such cases because they combined elements that captured people's curiosity: romance, secrecy, tragedy, and the possibility of hidden motives. For the public, the situation felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and every new detail seemed to bring them closer to understanding the truth. For Mary Ann, this period must have been filled with intense pressure and uncertainty. Being at the center of an investigation meant living under constant scrutiny. Every action, every word, and every connection from her past was now being examined carefully. What had once been private parts of her life were becoming topics of public conversation. In a society that placed enormous value on reputation and morality, this kind of attention could completely transform a person's identity in the eyes of others. Eventually, as more information was gathered and analyzed, authorities began forming their conclusions about what had really happened. The story that had started as a simple tale of marriage and illness had evolved into something far more complex. It was now a narrative about human emotions, difficult choices, and the consequences that can follow when frustration, longing, and secrecy collide. Whether people saw Mary Ann as a tragic figure shaped by circumstances or as someone responsible for a dark decision depended largely on their own interpretation of the events. In the years that followed, the story of Mary Ann Ansell continued to be remembered and discussed by those interested in historical mysteries. Her life became an example of how ordinary beginnings can sometimes lead to extraordinary and troubling outcomes. What began as a quiet relationship between two people eventually turned into a story that captured public imagination and raised questions about love, loyalty, and the limits of human patience. Even long after the events themselves had passed, the name Mary Ann Ansell remained connected to a narrative that reminded people how complicated human lives can become when emotions, secrets, and difficult circumstances intertwine in ways that no one at the beginning could have ever predicted.